how many yachts can you water ski behind at the same time? When is enough enough?
When I set up this interview with Barry Avrich, I guess I was a little intimidated, partly because he carved a path in advertising, a lane that I drove in. And he did such extraordinary things rather than just working on consumer brands that we'd all know. I mean, he was front and center running campaigns for Les Misérables, the Phantom of the Opera, the Toronto International Film Festival, Frank Sinatra's last concerts.
Frank stayed at the party a little too long and the voice was not great. I said to him, Mr. Sinatra, tell me something about you that no one knows.
But as I dove into his story, I mean, he's a kid who grew up in Montreal, son of a garment industry executive and a homemaker. And his dad telling him, don't blend in.
You know, when you walk into a room, people should never say, gee, that's a great tie. They should recognize you.
In university, he rents himself out as a fake fan and hires fellow students. Ends up parlaying that not only into a business, but a business he sells for $50,000 to a US PR firm. He becomes one of Canada's most extraordinary filmmakers and builds this business called Melbar Entertainment. It's produced more than 50 films. From The Last Mogul to Prosecuting Evil to The Road Between Us, which caused a lot of controversy this year because film festivals were wondering if it was too hot to handle.
I don't ever think that it becomes a film festival's mission and responsibility. The most powerful people in the world are the consumers. If you don't want to buy a ticket, don't.
But what you'll hear in this story is yes, marketing can move markets, but movies, especially movies the way Barry produces them, well, they can move our heart and mind.
To have them both weep, very, very fulfilling for me.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
Barry Avrich, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Pleasure. My dream to be on this show.
I always like the backstory that leads people into these journeys. And I loved when I was reading an article on you, you said your father and mother never urged you to blend in. What did that look like in a Montreal childhood? Because back when we were kids, you know, the blending in was everything. We all wore Levi's or Lee's. We played ball hockey and just one band of brothers and sisters. So tell me a little bit about why they wanted you as an anomaly.
It was really my father who said, don't blend in. He gave me, 3 key pieces of advice in my life. That was one of them. He was in the clothing business and sold many different lines of ladies' clothing. He understood color. He understood the difference between background and foreground, and just didn't feel that anybody should wear a uniform. If you wanted to be noticed, then you shouldn't blend in. He said, when you walk into a room, people should never say, gee, that's a great tie. They should recognize you. And he was very conscious of that and very, very supportive of the fact that I was not going to take the traditional trajectory that one would expect of their child to be a doctor, lawyer, or whatever. So, whatever I wanted to do, he just said, just don't blend in and be great.
And it's interesting the way you describe, your dad's in the garment industry and he's understanding color and foreground and background. Where did that come from? Because back then, males and females were cookie cuttered in a certain way.
Not to him. He was an incredible salesman. And so he traveled in this Chrysler New Yorker from city to city with this metal rack that he had custom made in his car with huge sample bags of various lines of ladies' clothing of colors, names of colors that he made up. And when he was showing his line to department stores and retailers, he was just an incredible sales guy. He had a suitcase that he custom made that turned into a bar. So if he was going into a hotel room, he can turn it into a bar and his own lighting. I mean, he wasn't in show business, but man, was he ever. This guy knew how to show a line of clothing and sell like nobody's business. So self-made, he understood that. And it was the same guy, Tony, who said to me when we go to see movies when I was a kid, watch the audience, not the movie. And what that meant was, for me as a filmmaker, is that watch when the audience looks at their phone or fidgets, they're getting restless, and you know you've lost them. He was a master at understanding his audience, and he was trying to teach me that.
And I had to laugh. I've never heard this job on a teenager's resume, rent a fan club. How did that all come about?
This was an idea that I had when I was going to Ryerson, now TMU, in a program there where I was surrounded by out-of-work actors and actresses, students, and in the theater and the film program, Eric McCormick, who went on to become a lifelong friend of mine, the guy from Will and Grace, was in the same program as I was. And somebody had come to me and said, look, my uncle's having a birthday party and I'm trying to figure out something great to do. And I said, why don't we all pretend to be his fans? And when he comes out of the house or the restaurant, we'll have autograph books and cameras and just yell, hey, Tony, we know you're in advertising. Hey, Tony, and yell out all these things. And this guy said, that's great. I'll give you $1,000. And I said, great. And I got all my friends together and they each got $50 to show up on a Saturday night and do this. And I think there's a business here. And so I incorporated something called Rent a Fan Club. And I was working part-time for a publicist. And he said, well, let me send out a press release for you on this new company. I didn't even know what a press release was. We were in school. Suddenly we were on the news, on everything, every news outlet in Toronto at the time. And my phone in my one-room apartment was ringing off the hook. George Cohan, who was the head of McDonald's at the time, you remember, hired us for 3 days to follow around the CEO of McDonald's Japan. And whenever he came out of his hotel or a business meeting, we were screaming his name and pretending to be his fan club. I called it Purveyors of Instant Celebrity. And that got me through school. And then I sold the concept to an American public relations firm for $50,000.
You know, the positive influence of your dad and these great lessons in life. The other side was your uncle, who kind of laughed when you said you wanted to get into films and said, what are you going to do? Do movies on, I think it was beavers. And how did that impact you? Was that, I'm going to defy him? Or did that really was the impetus for you to get into a sort of advertising in more of a secure industry?
Here was a man, Tony, that was a dreamer and a failure. I idolized this guy because he just had huge dreams but couldn't attain them. He had a printing company and he printed stuff. And I would go and work there in the summer because I didn't want to go to summer camp. And we'd sit and talk all the time. And he had dreams. He wanted to be published books. He wanted to do all kinds of stuff and never got there. Knew my dream was to make films. And what he knew of the Canadian film industry was right. He said, it's the National Film Board or nothing. And he handed me a September issue of Vogue. What do you see in this magazine? I said, it's filled with ads. And he goes, that's the business for you. You can be creative. You'll make money. You can tell your stories and do commercials. He knew advertising because he was a printer. He printed for ad agencies. And you'll make a living. If you're going to be in the film industry, you're going to starve. And then if you go into advertising, you can make short films, commercials. I didn't know that 35 years later, I'd be doing both and still am.
Early on, I mean, the agency Echo, very well respected, but really had a lane that you owned, which was entertainment. And you're in your 20s and you're doing things like Les Misérables, the Phantom of the Opera, TIFF Film Festival, working with the Rolling Stones. How did that lane come about? Because that's any creative person's dream would be to work on the experiential side and certainly with those nameplates.
The founder of the agency was connected to two iconic entertainment people when that agency was founded in the mid-70s. One of them was Michael Cole, who was a massive concert promoter who was looking for an ad agency and in fact owned a good chunk of that ad agency, referring to Echo Advertising. And the other client, major client, was Garth Drabinsky, who had something called Cineplex Movie Theaters. And so the founder of that agency was able to sort of hook his wagon to two entertainment superstars at the time. And there was really no such thing as an entertainment specialty in terms of an ad agency. So he used to say, this founder, that, you know, if you had two of the same kind of clients, it was a conflict. If you had three, you were now a specialist. And so suddenly all the entertainment business was coming our way at that agency. And then we then did something unbelievable, was that aside from looking after entertainment clients, we then realized that Hollywood Boulevard and Madison Avenue could intersect. And if you could take the Rolling Stones to Molson or Budweiser, or you could take the Phantom of the Opera to Pepsi and create marketing programs, then you were beyond huge and beneficial. So the agency went from being a very solid entertainment agency to now being an agency that looked after massive entertainment sponsorships, and then other clients who just liked our entertainment stuff. We picked up, huge pieces of business from, American Express, who were getting into the entertainment business with Front of the Line, and Starbucks, and all kinds of clients that just liked our spin.
You mentioned that your entire life, you've kind of left hand and right hand advertising and filmmaking. And so I think it was in 1998, while you're still very involved with Echo, that you formed Melbar Entertainment?
Yeah, Melbar Entertainment. I was making short films from the time I was 10. And then once I'd moved to Toronto from Montreal, I was experimenting with documentaries and was selling a couple of them. I was going from, one every couple of years to like 3 a year, and decided to form a film company, Melbar Entertainment Group, and then started getting into television production, major award shows, and stage to screen. We did 21 major theatrical productions from stage to screen as adaptations, and always did both. The founder of Echo Advertising never liked that. He felt, how could you be doing both, but yet, when you work 7 days a week and the clients love you, what's the issue?
How did you manage to do both? Because the advertising world, especially entrepreneurial, it's not like multinational clients are just handing you the Canadian account. You got to eat what you kill. So how did you find a way to keep both going and doing both very well?
I have a huge capacity for work. I don't sleep a lot. I sleep 4 hours a night. I'm productive when I'm on airplanes or when I'm walking down the street. My mother, who's no longer with us, couldn't understand the juggling and the tension. How can you manage it all? A ball is going to drop. And it never did. I mean, I've had a couple of kicks in the head in advertising, as one does, but that's life. You keep rolling. But to me, client service is everything. You might misfire on a piece of creative now and then, and you might misfire on a strategy, but if your client service is so spectacular, and I saw myself as never above anything. I am a concierge. You need theater tickets, I'll get them for you. You need some help with your kid to get into a certain school, I will do anything and help you. And I learned that from being a salesperson in the Eaton Center while I was in school. You just do what you have to do. You're never above it, given your title or where you're at in life. And so I just have a good capacity for doing both. And in advertising, that world's blended for me. And then a lot of my clients in advertising, I'm doing long form work for in film and television, where where I'm telling their story. And so it's been a bit of a hybrid, and I love it.
It's interesting because I would say advertising is mostly about positivity and possibility. A lot of your filmmaking has to do with power, the amplification of power or the abuse of power. Is that just your creative soul? You need both? Or is it just the fact that as an entrepreneur, both lanes are available to you and you want to drive your car down both?
In the beginning, I needed both because, you were in the advertising business and you get it, and that, you can get knocked around a lot. You could have creative concepts that you dream of that are watered down. I felt I needed a different creative outlet at night and on the weekends where, I could satiate my creativity versus some clients that were just basically saying, I don't want to do that. Now, this far into the journey in Act 3, I try to work on advertising that is equally satisfying. Otherwise, I would have given up one or the other, and I still love doing both.
You once called Lew Wasserman, the subject of The Last Mogul, a phenomenal film that you did, the most powerful man you never knew. What did you discover about power and loyalty in Hollywood that you felt wasn't just a story to be told then, but maybe lessons for all of us to learn?
It's not only Lew Wasserman and Last Mogul. I mean, there was probably a trilogy of powerful people that I made films about. Lew Wasserman, Harvey Weinstein, Garth Drabinsky, Canadian mogul. And the common arc in all of those three, including Lew Wasserman, who's probably the most powerful and wealthiest of those three, was that there was just never enough power for any of them. They could have all had extraordinary lives, and yet they would take incredible risks, and it was just never enough, and end up having different trajectories, but all quite sad. and depressing. In Lew Wasserman's case, not knowing when to give up power, and then ends up a lion in the winter, sitting in a commissary at Universal Studios where no one talks to him anymore, and where he could have just left the business and been, one of the great chairman emeritus ever. Harvey Weinstein just being completely corrupted by power. And same thing with, Garth Drabinsky, who took incredible risks and ended up going to jail, as did Harvey, who's in jail currently. And so I was amazed with that arc. There's a great line in the movie Wall Street, Oliver Stone's screenplay, where he says, how many yachts can you water ski behind at the same time? When is enough enough? Feeling comfortable about leaving the party and knowing that you've contributed and had a good time. There, I don't know if you remember this guy, Tony, years ago. He was one of the great impresario entertainment publicists in Canada named Gino Empri. And he stayed at the party too long, and he taught me everything. He was just so miserable at the end that no one was hiring him anymore. And people had had enough of him because he just couldn't stop complaining about that no one was calling him anymore. And I you have to know when to say, I've done it and I'm leaving.
As a psychologist, and I would say the way you treat your subject matter, you've got a lot of human psychology in those stories. Why do you think that is? Is it an addiction like cocaine that you just keep for that first hit? You've had your first taste of power and you want to continue to return to that source, hoping you'll feel that again? Or is it just...
if you've had it, and it's not the question of just the money and the private planes and the properties and all that, the access, there is something in that, especially in the entertainment industry, not only for the entertainer. That's why so many entertainers become addicted to something. If you've walked onto that stage, and I remember we did the Rolling Stones SARS concert in Toronto, and I was on the stage. I had the opportunity of doing the marketing to have access to the Rolling Stones and go on the stage when they were introduced and feel the audience scream for you and feel that heat and that power come at you. It is not only euphoric, it is a drug. And so if you're a producer, there's a tremendous loneliness and isolation when you go back to that hotel room or no longer have it. You look for something to replicate it.
When we return, Barry Avrich and I talk more about the moments in his life where the subjects of his documentary looked at him and said, I don't need more. I just imagine how gratifying that would be to know the job you did was so well done.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman, host of Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. A big shout out to First Up with RBCX Music that promotes emerging Canadian artists. They provide a platform for these artists to perform, to find new fans through media exposure, and access industry experts and mentors. RBC is enabling Canadian talent to continue to hone their craft, progress their careers, and follow their passions. Supporting Canadian artists matters to RBC.
Basically what I felt, that I'm on a mission, and I'm going to use all my experience, all my knowledge, all my values to save my family. As simple as this.
So we weren't just using footage, to make a point or to shock people. This is what he saw at that very moment, along the way on the route, and then once he entered the kibbutz. This is what he saw through his eyes, as well as through the eyes of the body cam footage that Hamas filmed.
As this show airs this week, Barry Avrich will be accepting the Horatio Alger Award, one of the most prestigious honors in North America. It recognizes people who have overcome significant adversity to achieve success while remaining committed to helping others. It's named after Horatio Alger Jr., the 19th century American author who wrote rags to riches tales about perseverance and moral character, and Barry certainly has both. You've touched on some really tough individual journeys, but you said you wouldn't go near Jeffrey Epstein.
It's not quite true. Jeffrey Epstein, long before the world knew who Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and charged in 2009 for doing what he ultimately was exposed to be doing. And in those days, he was certainly a friend of Clinton. Bill Clinton, and was very, very powerful, but was unknown in most circles other than that elite circle. And I would see him around in Palm Beach, Florida, and I was curious about him, and I decided to do some research on him then, and said, "Oh my God, this guy did all this stuff. He was charged. It was awful, sex trafficking and sex with minors and all that kind of stuff, and yet literally was sent to jail." And they made sure that with Clinton's power, that the charge became federal versus state. So there's nothing the state can do. And then they let him leave at night and let him leave on the weekends, and like this ridiculous nothing sentence, and then went back at it. And so I'm watching him and realized, wait a minute, he's doing this again. And so I would park outside his house in Palm Beach, and I'd watch the young girls go in and out, and said, this isn't right. And I had a plan that I would take people that were of age and send them in under camera and try and expose them in this documentary. And so I took the project to Netflix. They said, "We've never heard of him. We like doing documentaries on famous people." And I said, "Trust me, this is the most powerful guy. He manages billions of dollars. This is his circle." And he was arrested. And I explained the whole story to them, and they said, "But we've never heard of him." "I know, but this is going to be the origin of a crime doc. We don't really know you. You need to go and hire an Academy Award-winning producer to produce you. And we recommend the guy that just did, I think it was the Lance Armstrong doping doc." So I go to see the guy in LA, and my time with him, Tony, in his office was shorter than the Uber ride down. And he basically said, you want me to produce a film about some kind of pedophile? Get out of my office. I gave it up.
You start moving a lot into justice and ethics and sort of the impact of culture. So you're now realizing that maybe movies can really move people of the heart and the mind. You can create a collective conscience. Prosecuting Evil, Law is Only Humanity Against War. You're so far ahead of your time on that, because that probably is the greatest tension point in society right now, is can law hold on to even democracy, let alone war?
Well, my subject was ahead of his time. 99 years old when I filmed him, Ben Ferenz. I'd like to take the credit you're giving me in terms of my filmmaking evolving, and maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. I'm too insecure as a Canadian to see that, but I'm a storyteller, and this story of this man who at 99 years old was still leading a crusade of law, not war, and was the last Nuremberg prosecutor. He had liberated Auschwitz. He had negotiated the reparation rights to Holocaust survivors and families from Germany to pay these reparations, and also was a co-creator of the International Criminal Court. This guy was unbelievable, 4'6", that's his height, and I just had to tell his story, and was just so amazed at the simplicity of his message and yet the power of it. I loved him.
And when you're screening that movie for the first time, are you watching the film or watching the audience?
If I'm making a film about someone that's still alive, I generally will rent a theater and I'll bring them in. Did this for David Foster too. They have no creative control, Tony, whatsoever, which is very liberating as ad people, as you know. In Ben Ferenz's case, I rented a movie theater in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and flew down, and here's this guy who's now 99 on the threshold of 100 watching this film about his life. Unbelievable. He cried, and put his hand, on my knee and said, "That's all I need. Thank you."
That must have been one of the most beautiful moments in your life.
Totally. Last week, I screened my latest film in Haifa, in Israel, the day they got the news that a peace plan had been signed. That was pretty much up there too.
Talk to me about Without Precedent, because now you're starting to also, and maybe you did it all the way through, but really talk about these individuals that overcome trauma, moments in time that most of us would never escape from, and yet go on and use that circumstance and that context to do extraordinary things for humanity. In her case, obviously, Abella's rise to the Supreme Court justice.
I did 2 films in the last few years. Without Precedent, The Supreme Life of Rosalie Abella, who was born in a displacement camp. Her parents were both Holocaust survivors, comes to Canada, barely speaks English, and then goes on to become the first female Jewish Supreme Court judge in Canada, and did incredible things as far as same-sex rights and LGBTQ rights and right to die. Incredible legislation. her story, I'm not a lawyer, and I'd be the last person in the world to tell a story about a judge or the law. But what I saw in that film was humanity and the fact that there was this incredible love story between her and her husband, who was a historian and had written an iconic book called None is Too Many about Canada's policy with reference to those fleeing the Holocaust during World War II. I just loved their chemistry, and that's what that film was about, aside from her achievements.
Obviously, the last couple of months, your name has been attached to this wonderful movie, The Road Between Us. TIFF pulled it out, brought it back in. It ended up being validated by winning the People's Choice Awards. What did that controversy reveal about courage, censorship, and timing in storytelling?
It's very disturbing to me, as somebody that had a long history with the Toronto Film Festival, and my great mentor in life, who I miss daily, was a co-founder of the Toronto Film Festival, and so I had a huge attachment to the film festival to begin with. One. Two is that I never saw a film festival to be a political epicenter of controversy. A film festival, from the day it was founded and set in 1976 to this year, its mission statement has always been to entertain, to create debate, to create dialogue, and to show, the best of films from around the world, including Canada. I don't ever think that it becomes a film festival's mission and responsibility to arbitrarily say, this film might be too hot. The most powerful people in the world are the consumers. If you don't want to buy a ticket, don't. Having the Toronto Film Festival accept the film with the words of important story, you're a Canadian filmmaker, to then take it out and yank it based on their concerns of protest and internal opposition, contrary to what I think was the foundation of that festival, or arts in general. I'm not a big fan of protesting art.
Do you think that's a sign that this concept of free speech and art that can be, as you said, both appreciated and debated, that is an endangered species?
It is. I mean, we're seeing it all over the world where people are questioning the programming of the Kennedy Center, theater festivals, book festivals, arts festivals, film festivals, where everyone on the programming team has to think twice about who they're going to offend, who they might offend, or whether they should show something or not show something. You have to take risks. And I do believe that the public, will let you know, as will donors and sponsors. But, the result of this division and this fear, Tony, has been that it's been frightening the lifeblood and sustenance of the arts and culture, because donors and sponsors are afraid that their brand is going to get thrown into something of a maelstrom of the public's discontent, and it doesn't reflect well on their brand, so they're staying away, which means that, culture will die.
Advertising is living in this world of shades of gray. And to me, I think why that industry is an endangered species. You're either creating ads with texture for non-for-profits that have to accept what you're doing because you're doing it for free. But mainstream brands, to me, I'm checking boxes. Have I included everybody in our society? Am I making sure I offend nobody? You talk about the in culture being endangered, even our brands endangered because they can't stand for and stand out.
Well, I think at the end of the day, a strong brand always finds a way to reach its customer. I don't think suddenly somebody's going to not buy an iPhone, but for most brands, the glory days of being bold and taking risks and, again, not blending in are long behind us. You can't walk into a client today with a storyboard or a concept that you haven't somehow sterilized. We're seeing, in certain countries in the world, and like you, I'll watch Super Bowl, and occasionally there's some great elements of creativity that get through because someone's a visionary. But, oh man, Canada's always been 5 to 10 years behind correcting itself anyway. So it's not the best of times.
Earlier on in the interview, you talked about this huge capacity for work, and you're working even when you're walking on the streets, but it's still finite capacity. How do you choose what your next story is going to be?
I'm able to sort of see down the road and figure out how I can get it made. I'm impatient. And so if I'm really excited about a story, if all of the pieces are there, and my access that I need to whatever the story's about, whether it's the research or whether it's the people themselves or what I'm shooting, if I could see it down the road, then that's the one I'm jumping on first. And it doesn't mean that I don't have multiple projects. I've got 2 in post-production now. I'm pitch stuff constantly, and I've got, not behind me, but I've got another wall with a million ideas that, you just read. You're on airplanes, or you read, or you think about, or you see a piece on the news and say, gee, that would be a really good doc, and you float it as long as you can. I'm okay erasing them off the board if it's not moving.
Is there a time during the day? People talk about, I get a lot of ideas when I'm walking, but is it in the shower, or is it just as you're middle of the night, or you wake up at 4 a.m, say, I got to get out of bed, or ideas just flow all the time?
All the time. I don't keep my iPhone anywhere near my bed, but I will run to it sometimes because I've had a problem unlocking an idea. And again, I'm not a great sleeper. So if I do go to bed with that problem, I am wrestling it in my head like a Rubik's Cube, trying to figure out the solution.
What do you like to live with and have other people put you within the social circle? Because I have to believe most life must be quite boring to you because you've got such an imagination and you're seeing future possibilities where a lot of people are really just quite happy to be in the present.
If you ask my friends or even my wife, she'll decide what I should go to if we're going out socially, because if it's not moving along, I do get very mischievous. We'll take a conversation or a situation down a road to entertain myself. And my father used to do that too. My father would answer any ringing phone anywhere. We'd walk through a department store. If the phone was ringing, he'd pick it up and tell them that all the pants in the store were 50% off, and fridges were for being given away free or whatever. And so I've inherited some of that. In life, you tend to, I don't know if you've had this, Tony, but you tend to curate who's around you too. A lot of people do expect me to be the entertainer, but I've condensed my group to people that I find interesting also, stimulate my mind. It used to be the old cliche of, if you're playing tennis, you play tennis with someone that's better than you.
Within the creative process, I've worked with people that are highly collaborative. I've worked with people that like to just go away, solve the problem, and then use others to maybe sand and polish it. How would you describe your creative process?
Incredibly collaborative, have the best people around you. However, there is one vision in terms of the storytelling. It has to start somewhere. So, in my own documentaries, advertising aside, I do map something out on a wall, and then I'm completely open to what the team might suggest as they're polishing and sanding as they get there. I'm on a doc right now, and the team came back to me with a different structure for the story, and I'm completely fine with it. But there's got to be someone that leads the arc and the building blocks and the style. Do I want to be on set shooting a doc and be the same thing for your commercial where your client is saying, I put the chair there and that lighting, mind you, clients do that anyway. But on a doc, it's going to be me, who sort of sets a tone and flavor for the piece.
And how do you manage ego? Because as you said, there has to be somebody that's quarterbacking as the vision. You want to inspire people and empower people to bring their best work forward. But there's times where you got to look at it and say, that's not right.
First of all, my education, I've worked with the biggest egos in show business, and you learn very early that it's not personal, it's performance. And so I'd listen to people, a lot of those names I mentioned earlier would scream and yell at me in my early career. And I somehow knew enough to understand that it was just them performing, and that, what should I take away from what they were saying? And if they were wrong, to respond back. And so, with the people I'm working with, if it's wrong and I'm dealing with egos, especially, creative people, I will often say, do both and let me see it. Ultimately, it's my name on it. I reserve the right to say no, but I'm open to your ideas 100%, and I'm happy to be wrong. And that does happen. Absolutely. I'm open to that. But if in my gut, it's just not the right way to go, then so be it. Then you should make your own projects if you hate the process. But I'm very collaborative.
Couple of final questions. You describe film as a pressure washer on collective memory.
When you're making a documentary and you're making the films that I'm making, there is a constant sense of keeping a pace and a pressure within the film to keep the audience interested, to keep the story going. It's that 3-act, what's the drama? What's the climax? And the collective memory part is remembering what's worked in other projects and what has worked and hasn't worked. And so I'm constantly thinking about that. And it's tough for my various editors that I work with and I should tell you that my process after I have a sense of where I want to go with the film. We have an entire wall of index cards, and then I leave my editors alone for generally 12 to 14 weeks. And then they come back with the clay. It's generally too long. And my producers always remind me that you're going to hate it, but I could see where it's going. And then we start to mold it and make it better. And it's that collective memory of what works and doesn't work. And at the same time, keeping that tension on. I am constantly in life nervous and panicked about being bored.
With documentaries, you're about exposing the truth, but part of the talent of a great documentarian is to leave room for empathy. That even if this person is the most horrific person in the world, I still have to relate to them as a human being. I have to see how their journey unfolds. And how do you find a way to balance that? Because at times you might have to soften the truth to push up a bit of the more emotional elements.
I let the audience decide. I always have in all my films. I'm not a big fan of Michael Moore, who is a great documentary filmmaker, but it's more about exposing the underbelly of someone or something. I let the audience decide. I did a film a couple of years ago that's on CBC now on YouTube called The Talented Mr. Rosenberg, this con artist in Yorkville, the Yorkville swindler, where, he is extraordinarily charming and entertaining and attractive. And I even found myself when I was filming him and editing the film that, there needed to be more edge in it because you were finding him comical at times, but yet he was stealing from women and ruining people's lives. And I let the audience decide. But it's critical in my filmmaking to show what drives someone, the psychology of what drives someone to do the things that they've done. And they were once good people and maybe still are.
Back as a kid, you're staging talent shows to entertain. And then fast forward to later in your career, you create a theater at Toronto's Sick Kids Hospital. Was there a connection between the two that you saw that kind of happiness you could bring putting out this live entertainment and thinking that not just laughter is the best medicine, but movies can be as well?
I can't even drive down Hospital Row in Toronto without being nauseous. I'm so squeamish with anything medical and so bad. And I had to go and visit somebody in the hospital, and I walked by a kid in a hospital bed watching a movie on a portable DVD player, balancing this on his little body, trying to watch this movie. And I went, that's not the way a movie should be seen. That's stupid and sad. And so that day I called an amazing woman named Mary Jo Haddad, who was the CEO of Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. And I said, I got to her. I said, Mary Jo, you don't know who I am, but I want to build a movie theater in your hospital. I'll raise the money and you have 24 hours to say yes or no. She said, that's the most arrogant thing anyone has ever said. Why do I have 24 hours? And I said, because I'm going to then go to another hospital and I will not live through the bureaucracy of hospitals, or boards or management. Just say yes, Mary Jo. Give me the space, which I knew they had. Every hospital has dead space. And let me build it. And she came back in 24 hours and she said, go, but we need to be involved in the design. The seats have to be, hypoallergenic, and the carpets and the all the stuff that you need to do. And it was painful, but her right hand said that I was a hurricane in a tent.
After decades studying power and human ambition, what surprises you about people? And do you still have hope that stories can change the world for the better?
I continue to be surprised at the risks people take that have everything. In the Garth Drabinsky book that he wrote before he went to jail, long before he went to jail, he makes reference to Icarus the Greek mythological god that flies too close to the sun. And in Garth's case, the sun was about, glory and heat. In many of these cases, the sun is bad. It amazes me of how many people who have everything risk everything because it's just not enough.
The second question, obviously, is stories. Can stories counter what's going on in this world?
100%. The film I just made, The Road Between Us, which is a story of heroism that takes place on October 7th. It's controversial, apparently. The root of the story is family. Whatever side you're on, wherever you're living in the world, what would you do for your own family? What if you got a text message at 6:30 in the morning that your children were in danger? What would you do? That's the story. It happens to take place in a politically charged part of the world, so you can call the film political, or you can look at it and say, what would I do? People who are going to see it, they're seeing it all over the place, are thinking about it and spending a little bit more time with their family, and that was my goal.
Is there a story you walked away from that still haunts you?
It's not so much walked away. It's stories that I wanted to tell that I didn't get the right to. I don't think anything that I've walked away from. There's still a couple of stories that I still want to tell, but there are a couple of entertainment biodocs of lane changers, and you would appreciate that given your career. Barbra Streisand, Ralph Lauren, who I loved as a lane changer in fashion and given my background with my father. But the doc that was ultimately made about him the subject was too closely involved. And so it just became infomercial-ish to me.
You had a chance to interview anybody, dead or alive.
I got to meet a lot of great people that I loved from Don Rickles, and another one your audience might not know, but Robert Evans, and who ran Paramount Studios and produced the Godfather and Love Story and other things. Frank Sinatra, who I met, we were doing his last concert tour. My agency was doing his last concert tour, and it wasn't good. This was a guy, unlike Tony Bennett, who I also worked with, who Tony Bennett looked after his instrument, his voice, and was great. But Frank stayed at the party a little too long, and the voice was not great. He was touring, and it was at the Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. And he was very nice, and I wasn't thinking documentary, but I wish I was, because I would love to do the definitive on him. I said to him, Mr. Sinatra, tell me something about you that no one knows. He looked at me and he said, kid, I do the crosswords in pen.
Tell me something about you that no one knows.
I feel fully satiated. If somebody said, that's it, you're done, I'm good. Do I want to stop being creative? Do I want to stop telling stories? No. But I've had a great time. And I've had great failure too. Bad partners, some bad times, loss, like we all do. But Quincy Jones gave me the greatest advice in the world, Tony, and I never forgot it. And I was going through a terrible business situation of a partner that did something so bad. Never forgot it. He said to me, don't you understand that you can't have a beautiful picture without the negative? And the cloud lifted.
I always end with my 3 takeaways. And it's interesting. The first one, which is really roared through your entire career, is your dad saying, don't blend in. Even when he was answering the phones in the department stores and saying the fridges are free. I mean, this is who you are. And especially when you get into a situation which is a lot of oatmeal, you want to pop your head up and pick up that phone and do something with it. I think one of the most touching things is Ben Franz at 99, sitting there watching his life on screen, putting his hand on your leg and saying, that's all I need.
Had the same thing, Tony, with Rosalie Abella. She was so nervous. David Foster, so nervous. And we were both nervous. We're both shaking. Who am I to tell a great story about a music producer and get the cuts right and the songs and the blending and everything that David Foster did? And then also with Rosalie Abella, who am I to pick the top 6 Supreme Court cases or court cases that have defined her career? But to have them both weep and to see their lives and footage and images they have never seen, very, very fulfilling for me.
And I guess the last one, and maybe makes me understand a bit of the ultra wealthy and how I can never understand why they're not willing to share more of what they have. because history will tell you that as wealth continues to consolidate with a handful, the pitchforks come up and society completely revolts. And that happens time and time again. But you really help explain it to me that when you're in that world of seeking power, it's never enough. They're willing to risk almost everything, including potentially the scorn of society, to go down in history as be somebody, instead of being somebody that was known as an entrepreneur and a creator and a builder, but in fact somebody that maybe tore at the soul of society. So Barry, I had no idea how this interview would go, because I've always looked up at you and sort of said, there's this somebody that seems to be a little bit unapproachable, but you're incredibly approachable, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, so did I. I appreciate that. And I will say this, and you don't need to hear it. I mean, in my advertising career, I'm a longtime admirer, and certainly for many iterations of my career, I've looked at, what you've done, and looked at, how you figured out the psychology of the consumer and a better way to reach them. And so that wasn't left or lost on me either.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.